The rain hammered my garage roof like angry fists, each drop a reminder that even the weather had turned against me. I was elbow deep in the engine of my '98 Chevy when I heard Brooke's voice cutting through the storm. "Mom's with Sebastian again tonight," she whispered into her phone, thinking the rain would mask her words. "He says he'll take care of us both just like old times if she finally leaves Frank." I froze, wrench suspended in midair above the carburetor. Brooke Delacroix, my stepdaughter of 3 years, stood just outside the garage door, her silhouette barely visible through the grimy window. The girl I'd helped through her senior year of high school, the one I'd co-signed a car loan for, was discussing my marriage like a business transaction. "Yeah, I know," she continued, her voice carrying that entitled tone I'd grown to recognize. "Frank's sweet and all, but Sebastian can pay for my college without breaking a sweat. Mom deserves better than this dump anyway." This dump. The house I'd bought specifically because it had enough bedrooms for Brooke to visit during college breaks. The house I'd stretched my electrician's salary to afford because Jackie wanted her daughter to feel welcome. I set the wrench down carefully, my hands steadier than they had any right to be. 23 years of working with high-voltage systems had taught me patience, precision, and the importance of not making sudden moves when everything could explode. "He's taking us to that new place downtown tomorrow," Brooke was saying. "The one with the glass elevator. Mom's so excited she can barely contain herself." Sebastian Delacroix, Jackie's ex-husband, Brooke's biological father, and apparently the man currently dismantling my marriage from the inside out. I'd met him exactly twice, once at Brooke's graduation and once at an awkward dinner where he'd spent the entire evening talking about his real estate empire while I pushed meatloaf around my plate. The rain softened to a steady patter as Brooke ended her call and headed back toward the house. I waited until I heard the front door close before emerging from behind the truck. Through the kitchen window, I could see her microwaving leftover pizza, scrolling through her phone with the casual indifference of someone who'd just arranged to blow up another person's life. Inside, the house felt different. The family photos on the mantel seemed to mock me. Jackie and me on our wedding day, the 3 of us at last year's county fair, Brooke's graduation with all of us smiling like we meant it. Had Jackie been planning this even then? "Hey, Frank," Brooke called from the kitchen without looking up. "Mom's working late again. Something about closing a big property deal." "Yeah," I said, my voice coming out steadier than I felt. She mentioned that. She hadn't mentioned it. Jackie had left that morning with nothing more than a quick peck on the cheek and a vague comment about showing houses all day. But now I understood why she'd been taking so many evening appointments lately, why she'd started dressing up for work showings, why she'd been so tired when she finally came home. I climbed the stairs to our bedroom, each step feeling heavier than the last. Jackie's side of the closet told a story I'd been too trusting to read. New dresses still bearing price tags, expensive perfume I'd never smelled on her at home, shoes that cost more than I made in a week. Her purse sat on the dresser, and for the first time in our marriage I violated her privacy. Buried beneath receipts and makeup, I found a second phone. Not her usual iPhone with the cracked screen protector, but a sleek device I'd never seen before. The messages painted a picture that made my stomach turn. Sebastian's texts were confident, possessive, already planning their future together. Jackie's responses were eager, grateful, apologetic for the delay in leaving me. "The house is almost ready to list," she'd written just yesterday. "Frank won't see it coming. He trusts me completely." The house, our house, the one I'd worked double shifts to afford, the one I'd spent weekends fixing up, the one I'd thought we were building a life in together. I scrolled back further, finding months of messages, plans, promises, intimate details of a relationship that had been flourishing while I'd been working overtime to pay for Jackie's real estate classes, her new wardrobe, her business dinners, that I now realized had been dates. But it was the messages involving Brooke that truly twisted the blade. Sebastian had been bribing her, promising college tuition and a new car in exchange for her cooperation. She'd been driving Jackie to their meetings, providing alibis, even suggesting restaurants where they were unlikely to encounter anyone who knew me. "Brooke's been such a help," Jackie had texted. "She understands that sometimes adults need to make difficult choices for everyone's happiness." Everyone's happiness except mine, apparently. I photographed every message, then carefully returned the phone to its hiding place. Downstairs, Brooke was watching television, her feet propped up on the coffee table I'd built by hand. "Everything okay?" she asked, glancing up as I passed through the living room. "Perfect," I replied, and meant it. For the first time in months, everything was crystal clear. I stepped outside onto the front porch, letting the cool evening air wash over me. The neighborhood looked the same as always. Modest homes with well-maintained lawns, porch lights creating warm circles in the darkness, the distant hum of traffic from the main road. But I was seeing it all through new eyes now. My phone buzzed with a text from Jackie. "Showing ran late, don't wait up." I almost laughed. The audacity was breathtaking. She was probably with Sebastian right now, planning their future while I sat in the house I'd bought for us, being lied to by both the women I'd been foolish enough to trust. But instead of anger, I felt something else settling over me like a comfortable old jacket. Clarity. Purpose. The same feeling I got when I was troubleshooting a complex electrical problem. That moment when all the circuits suddenly made sense and you knew exactly which wire to cut. I pulled out my own phone and started making calls. First to my buddy Mike at the bank, then to my lawyer cousin Tommy, then to a few other people who might prove useful in the coming days. By the time Jackie's headlights swept across the driveway at midnight, I had the beginnings of a plan. She slipped into bed quietly, probably thinking she was being considerate. I lay still, listening to her settle in beside me, smelling the unfamiliar cologne that clung to her hair. "How was the showing?" I asked softly. "Oh, you're awake," she whispered back. "It went well. Very promising clients." "That's great, honey. I'm happy for you." And I was, because tomorrow, Jackie and Sebastian and Brooke were all going to discover that I'd learned a thing or two about making promises during my 23 years as an electrician. The most important lesson being that before you can build something new, you have to strip away all the old wiring, even if it means working in the dark for a while. I woke up before dawn, a habit ingrained by years of beating construction traffic to job sites. Jackie slept peacefully beside me, her face relaxed in a way I hadn't seen when she was awake in months, probably dreaming about Sebastian's penthouse or whatever promises he'd made her the night before. Brooke was still asleep when I left for work, but I could hear her phone buzzing with messages through her bedroom door, coordinating the day's deception, no doubt. At the job site, I found myself rewiring a house that had been gutted by the previous owner's attempts at electrical work. Dangerous, shoddy connections that could have burned the place down. The irony wasn't lost on me. Whoever did this original work was either incompetent or malicious, I told my apprentice Danny as we surveyed the mess. Either way, we're starting from scratch. "Can't we just patch it?" Danny asked. "No shortcuts," I replied, pulling out a section of corroded wire. "When the foundation is rotten, you tear it all down and build it right." During lunch break, I made the first of several important phone calls. My cousin Tommy had been expecting my call. Apparently, my voice last night had telegraphed more than I'd realized. "You sure about this, Frank?" he asked. "Once we start the paperwork, there's no going back." "I'm sure," I said, watching traffic flow past the construction site. "How long do we have?" "In Michigan? If we file today and she doesn't contest, we could have preliminary orders within 2 weeks. But Frank, if she's been planning this as long as you think, she might have her own lawyer already lined up." That was a sobering thought. How long had Jackie been preparing for this? Had she consulted attorneys while I was working overtime to pay for her career change? The woman I'd married wouldn't have been capable of such calculation, but then again, the woman I'd married wouldn't have been meeting her ex-husband in hotel rooms while her daughter provided transportation. My second call was to Mike at First National, where Jackie and I had our joint accounts. I need to understand our options, I told him. Hypothetically, if I suspected my spouse was planning to drain our accounts, what protections do I have? Mike's silence stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. "Frank," he finally said, "are you in some kind of trouble?" "Not yet," I replied, "but I might be soon." He walked me through the basics. Joint accounts meant either party could access the funds, but there were ways to freeze assets if fraud was suspected. More importantly, he confirmed what I'd already suspected. Jackie had been in twice in the past month, asking about account balances and withdrawal procedures. She seemed particularly interested in our wire transfer policies. Mike added reluctantly, "I probably shouldn't be telling you this, but you've been banking with us for 15 years, and she's only been on the accounts for 3. The third call was the most important and the most difficult. I'd gotten Margot Delacroix's number from the business directory. She ran her own consulting firm and had kept her married name despite what I was beginning to suspect were serious problems in her own marriage. "Mrs. Delacroix, this is Frank Mercer. I'm married to your husband's ex-wife." Another long silence, but this one felt different, calculating rather than surprised. "I wondered when you might call," she said finally. "How much do you know?" "Enough," I replied. "The question is, how much do you know?" "More than enough. Can we meet?" We arranged to meet that evening at a diner halfway between our towns. I spent the rest of the workday finishing the rewiring job, taking satisfaction in the clean, safe connections we'd installed. Every wire properly grounded, every circuit protected, every junction box labeled and accessible. "This'll last them 50 years, Danny said, admiring our work. "That's the point," I told him. "You build it right the first time, or you don't build it at all." I arrived at the diner early and chose a booth with a clear view of the parking lot. Margot Delacroix turned out to be a woman in her early 40s, impeccably dressed in a way that suggested serious money, but also serious business. She slid into the booth across from me with the confident movements of someone accustomed to difficult conversations. "Your wife is quite beautiful," she said without preamble. Sebastian always did prefer the obvious choices. "How long have you known?" I asked. "About Jackie specifically? 3 months? About Sebastian's pattern of revisiting old relationships when our marriage hits rough patches? Years." She signaled the waitress for coffee. "He thinks I don't notice, but I've built my career on noticing details other people miss." "Why haven't you left him?" Margot smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. "Because leaving would be expensive, and staying gives me opportunities to ensure he pays for his choices in other ways. Besides, I've grown quite fond of the lifestyle his real estate empire provides." She reached into her purse and pulled out a tablet, swiping to a folder full of photographs. Sebastian and Jackie at restaurants, entering hotels, sitting in his car outside various locations around town. The documentation was thorough and professional. "I hired a private investigator 6 weeks ago," she explained. "Not for divorce purposes. I'm not ready for that battle yet. But knowledge is power, and I believe in being well armed." "What do you want from me?" I asked. "Cooperation," she said simply. "Sebastian is planning to leave me for Jackie, but he's underestimating both of us. He thinks you're just a simple electrician who'll roll over when presented with divorce papers, and he thinks I'm a pampered wife who'll accept whatever settlement he offers." "And we're not?" "You rewired the Hendricks mansion last year," she said, surprising me with the specificity. "I know because I recommended you to them. Your work is meticulous, thorough, and you never leave loose ends. Those are exactly the qualities I need in a partner right now." She was right about the Hendricks job. It had been a challenging retrofit, requiring me to essentially rebuild their entire electrical system while they lived in the house. Patience, planning, and attention to detail. "What kind of partnership are you proposing?" I asked. Margot leaned forward, her voice dropping to just above a whisper. The kind where Sebastian and Jackie discover that betrayal is a game two can play, and some of us have been practicing longer. She outlined her plan with the same precision I used when designing electrical systems. Every contingency considered, every potential failure point addressed. It was elegant, thorough, and completely ruthless. The beauty of it, she concluded, is that it's all perfectly legal. Aggressive, perhaps, but legal. And Brooke? Your stepdaughter made her choice when she accepted Sebastian's bribes. She's an adult now. She can live with the consequences of her decisions. I studied Margot's face, looking for signs of the kind of instability that might make her a dangerous ally. But all I saw was the same cold calculation I'd been feeling since last night, the recognition of someone who'd been pushed too far and was finally ready to push back. When do we start? I asked. We already have, she replied, sliding a business card across the table. That's my private investigator. He's been documenting everything, but he'll need access to your house to install some additional monitoring equipment. Nothing illegal, just security cameras that happen to capture the driveway and front door. You want to record them? I want to document their choices, she corrected. When this is over, I want a complete record of exactly how they chose to destroy their marriages. Evidence has a way of being very persuasive in settlement negotiations. I pocketed the card. What about Jackie's plans for the house? Oh, that. Margot smiled again, and this time it was genuinely amused. She's been asking Sebastian about listing prices for your neighborhood. Apparently she thinks she can sell it quickly and split the proceeds as part of her divorce settlement. She's in for a surprise then. Several surprises, actually. I've taken the liberty of having the property appraised by 3 different firms. You might be interested to know that the improvements you've made over the years have increased its value considerably. Also, Michigan law has some very specific provisions about marital property when one spouse has been hiding assets or planning to defraud the other. I felt something that might have been hope stirring in my chest. You've done your homework. I always do my homework, Frank. It's why Sebastian's real estate business has been so successful. I handle all the research and legal compliance while he plays the charming salesman. He's about to discover what happens when he loses his behind-the-scenes support. We shook hands across the table, and I felt like I was sealing more than just a business arrangement. For the first time since discovering Jackie's betrayal, I wasn't facing the situation alone. One more thing, Margot said as we prepared to leave. Don't change your behavior at home. Let them think their plan is working perfectly. The more confident they become, the more careless they'll be. And if Jackie asks for a divorce before we're ready? She won't, Margot replied with certainty. Sebastian's convinced her that timing is everything. They want to wait until after Brooke's tuition is secured and Jackie's real estate license is fully established. They think they're being smart by ensuring she'll be financially stable when she leaves you. How considerate of them, isn't it? They're so focused on managing your reaction that they haven't considered what might happen if you don't react the way they expect. I drove home through the darkening streets, feeling more alert and focused than I had in months. The house looked the same as always when I pulled into the driveway, but now I understood it was just a stage set for Jackie's performance. Inside, she was cooking dinner. Actually cooking, not just reheating something from the freezer. She'd even opened a bottle of wine. You're in a good mood, I observed, accepting the glass she offered. I had a great day, she said, her smile bright and genuine. I think I might have found the perfect property for a very important client. Anyone I know? Oh, just someone with very specific requirements, she replied, turning back to the stove. But if this works out, it could really establish my reputation in the luxury market. Brooke wandered into the kitchen, drawn by the smell of actual home cooking. Wow, Mom, what's the occasion? Can't I cook a nice dinner for my family? Jackie asked, but I caught the look that passed between them. Some kind of signal or confirmation. Of course, Brooke said quickly. It smells amazing. We sat down to dinner like a normal family, discussing Brooke's classes and my work projects and Jackie's growing client list. Anyone watching from outside would have seen a typical evening in a happy household. But I was watching from inside now, and I could see all the wires that had been disconnected, all the circuits that were no longer carrying current. The foundation of our marriage had been gutted, and Jackie was just maintaining the facade until she was ready to flip the switch and leave me in the dark. Too bad for her that I'd already started rewiring the entire system. And unlike her previous electrician, I actually knew what I was doing. The next morning brought the first test of Margot's plan. I was replacing a faulty outlet in the bathroom when I heard Jackie on the phone downstairs, her voice carrying the excited energy I remembered from our early dating days. "No, Sebastian, I think tonight would be perfect," she was saying. "Frank's got that poker game with his work buddies and Brooke can drive me. We can finally look at those properties you mentioned." I smiled grimly as I connected the ground wire. Jackie had forgotten to mention any poker game to me, but I supposed she figured I'd just go along with whatever story she'd constructed. The old Frank probably would have. When I came downstairs, she was already getting dressed for what she claimed was a routine day of showing houses. "Don't wait up tonight," she said, adjusting her earrings in the hall mirror. "I might be late. You know how these evening appointments can run." "Actually," I said, "I was thinking of staying in tonight, maybe catching up on some reading." I watched her face in the mirror as she processed this unexpected deviation from her script. For just a moment, her practiced smile faltered. "Oh," she said. "Well, I just thought, didn't you mention poker with Danny and the guys?" "Did I? I don't remember that." I kept my voice casual, interested. "When did I say that?" Maybe I misunderstood." She turned away from the mirror, busying herself with her purse. "Anyway, I'll definitely be late, so don't feel like you have to wait up." "Sure thing, honey. Have a productive day." After she left, I called Danny and asked if he wanted to grab dinner and catch a game at Murphy's bar. He was surprised. I wasn't usually one for spontaneous social plans, but agreed readily enough. "Everything okay, Frank? You sound different." "Just feeling like getting out more," I told him. "Maybe I've been working too much lately." What I didn't tell him was that Murphy's had a perfect view of the Riverside Hotel parking lot, where Margot's investigator had photographed Jackie and Sebastian on multiple occasions. If they were following their usual pattern, they'd be there around 7. Brooke was in the kitchen when I got home from work, making herself a sandwich with the focused attention of someone trying to avoid conversation. "Mom said she'd be late tonight," she said, without looking up. "So she mentioned, what are your plans?" "Oh, you know, studying, maybe driving around with friends later." "Sounds fun. Anyone I know?" She shrugged, still not meeting my eyes. "Just college stuff." I nodded and headed upstairs to shower and change. Through the bathroom window, I could see Brooke in the backyard, pacing while she talked on her phone. Even from this distance, her body language screamed anxiety. At Murphy's, Danny and I claimed a table near the window, just as the evening crowd was settling in. The bar had that comfortable, lived-in atmosphere that comes from decades of serving the same community. Faded sports memorabilia on the walls, a jukebox that actually played vinyl records, and bartenders who knew everyone's usual order. "You sure you're okay?" Danny asked after we'd ordered. "You keep checking your watch." "Just expecting a call," I said, which was true. Margot had promised to update me on the evening's activities. At 7:15, a familiar silver Mercedes pulled into the hotel parking lot across the street. Even from this distance, I could recognize Sebastian's distinctive profile as he stepped out of the driver's side. A moment later, Jackie emerged from the passenger seat, smoothing her dress and checking her reflection in the car window. "Frank?" Danny was staring at me with concern. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "Something like that," I muttered, watching my wife disappear into the hotel with her ex-husband. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Package delivered as scheduled. Documentation in progress. Margot's investigator was earning his fee. I need to make a quick call, I told Danny, stepping outside into the cool evening air. Margot answered on the first ring. Right on schedule, she said without preamble. Room 412, registered under Sebastian's corporate account. My investigator has a room across the hall. How long do they usually stay? 2 to 3 hours. Long enough for dinner and extended conversation about real estate opportunities. The bitterness in her voice reminded me that she was going through her own version of this betrayal. Whatever else Margot might be, she was a woman watching her husband choose someone else, just like I was. Any word from Brooke? She asked. She's supposed to be studying, but I'm guessing she's actually waiting in the hotel bar or lobby, ready to provide transportation home. My investigator will document her presence as well. The more we can establish their pattern of coordination, the stronger our position becomes. I rejoined Danny, who tactfully didn't ask about the call. We watched the game and made small talk about work, but my attention kept drifting to the hotel across the street. Somewhere in that building, my wife was making plans for a future that didn't include me, probably discussing how to maximize her share of our assets and minimize any inconvenience to her new life. At 9:30, my phone rang. Jackie's name appeared on the screen. Hey, honey, she said, and I could hear restaurant noise in the background. I'm just finishing up with this client. It's going really well, but we might need to look at a few more properties. I'll probably be another hour or two. Take your time, I said. I'm just having a beer with Danny. Oh, that's nice. I'm glad you're getting out. You work too hard. The concern in her voice sounded genuine, which somehow made it worse. She could still access that caring tone, could still sound like the woman I'd married, even while orchestrating the destruction of our marriage. Drive safely, I told her. I will. Love you. Love you too. Danny was watching me with obvious curiosity when I hung up. Jackie working late again? Yeah, I said. Big client, very demanding. She's really thrown herself into this real estate thing, hasn't she? You could say that. At 10:45, Sebastian's Mercedes reappeared in the hotel parking lot. This time, Brooke was with them. I could see her distinctive red jacket as she got out of the back seat. They stood talking for a few minutes before Jackie and Brooke got into Brooke's car and Sebastian drove away in the opposite direction. My phone buzzed again. Full documentation complete. Meeting tomorrow to review materials? I texted back. Afternoon. I'll call with location. What's that about? Danny asked. Work stuff, I said. New client wants to discuss a big rewiring project. Which was true, in a way. I was definitely planning to rewire some things. I got home before Jackie and Brooke, giving me time to settle into my usual evening routine. I was reading in the living room when I heard Brooke's car in the driveway, followed by the sound of hushed conversation on the front porch. Jackie came in alone, looking slightly flustered. How was your evening? She asked, sitting down on the couch beside me. Good. Danny says hi. How was your client meeting? Productive, she said, but I noticed she didn't elaborate. The old Jackie would have told me all about the properties she'd shown, the client's reactions, her hopes for closing the deal. This Jackie just sat quietly, apparently lost in thought. Everything okay? I asked. Oh, yes, just tired. It was a long day. I bet. Where did you end up showing properties? She hesitated for just a moment, long enough for me to notice, but brief enough that she probably thought she'd covered it. The Riverside area, she said finally. You know, those new developments near the waterfront. Interesting. The Riverside Hotel was indeed near the waterfront, so technically she wasn't lying, just omitting the part about never leaving the hotel to look at any actual properties. Sounds promising, I said. Think they'll make an offer? It's hard to say. They're particular about what they want. Well, you're good at finding people exactly what they need. She smiled at that, a real smile that reminded me of better times. Thanks, Frank. That means a lot. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her, She was trapped in a web of lies that was only going to get more complicated, and she didn't even realize that I already knew about all of it. Part of me wanted to just confront her directly, to give her a chance to explain or apologize or somehow make this right. But then I remembered the messages on her secret phone, the casual way she'd discussed selling our house, Brooke's willingness to help deceive me. They'd made their choices carefully and deliberately. They deserved the consequences that were coming. "I'm going to bed," Jackie said, standing and stretching. "Don't stay up too late with your book." "Just a few more pages," I promised. After she went upstairs, I sat in the quiet living room, thinking about the evening's revelations. In 12 hours, I'd watched my wife lie to my face 3 separate times, coordinate with my stepdaughter to maintain those lies, and spend nearly 3 hours in a hotel room with her ex-husband while I sat across the street documenting her betrayal. Tomorrow, Margot and I would review the investigator's materials and finalize our next steps. The preliminary divorce papers were already being prepared, the asset protection measures were in place, and the documentation of Jackie's deception was growing more comprehensive by the day. But tonight, I just sat in the house I'd bought for us, listening to the woman I'd married getting ready for bed upstairs, and marveled at how completely I'd misunderstood the person I'd been living with. The old electrical system in this marriage had been faulty from the beginning, apparently. I'd just been too trusting to notice all the dangerous connections until they finally started sparking. Time to shut off the main breaker and start over with a completely new installation, one that would actually be built to code. Margot had chosen a coffee shop in the business district for our meeting, the kind of place where serious conversations happened over expensive lattes and no one paid attention to other people's private discussions. She arrived with a leather portfolio that looked like it could contain corporate merger documents or state secrets. "The documentation is quite comprehensive," she said, sliding a tablet across the table. "My investigator is very thorough." The photos were damning in their clarity. Jackie and Sebastian entering the hotel, their body language intimate and familiar. Brooke waiting in the lobby, checking her phone. The 3 of them leaving together, Sebastian's hand on Jackie's back in a gesture that spoke of ownership rather than casual friendship. "There are also audio recordings," Margot continued. "Nothing from inside the hotel room, obviously, but their conversations in the parking lot are quite illuminating." She handed me earbuds, and I listened to my wife and stepdaughter discussing their deception with the casual efficiency of a business partnership. "Frank's starting to ask more questions," Jackie's voice said through the tiny speakers. "Last night he wanted to know exactly where I'd shown properties." "Just stick to the story," Brooke replied. "He's not suspicious, just making conversation. Dad says men like Frank don't expect to be lied to because they don't lie themselves." "Sebastian's right," Jackie agreed. "Frank's too honest for his own good. It makes this easier, but I do feel guilty sometimes." "Mom, you can't think like that. You deserve to be happy, and Frank, well, he's a nice guy, but he's not exactly ambitious. Dad can give you the life you actually want." I pulled out the earbuds, feeling sick. The casual dismissal of our marriage, the clinical assessment of my character flaws, the complete absence of any real remorse. It was worse than simple betrayal. They'd reduced me to an obstacle to be managed rather than a person to be considered. "There's more," Margot said gently. "But perhaps that's enough for now." "No," I said, putting the earbuds back in. "I need to hear all of it." The next recording was from 3 days ago, Sebastian's voice joining the conversation as they planned their next steps. "The house should list for at least $250," he was saying. "After the mortgage and closing costs, Jackie should clear about $120,000. That'll be enough to get established while we work out the other details." "What about Frank?" Brooke asked. "Won't he contest the sale?" Sebastian's laugh was condescending and cruel. "Frank's an electrician, not a lawyer. By the time he figures out what's happening, the paperwork will already be filed. Jackie's name is on the deed, and Michigan law favors equitable distribution. He'll get his half of whatever's left after legal fees, but he won't be able to stop the process. And if he makes trouble? Jackie's voice was worried. He won't, Sebastian said with confidence. Men like Frank don't make trouble. They accept what they're given and move on. It's why he's been working the same job for 20 years instead of building something bigger. I set the earbuds down carefully, my hands shaking with rage. 20 years of marriage, and this was how my wife saw me, as someone too passive and unambitious to fight for what was mine. I'm sorry you had to hear that, Margot said, but you needed to understand exactly what we're dealing with. They think I'm harmless. They think you're predictable, she corrected. There's a difference. Harmless implies weakness. Predictable just means they haven't seen you in a situation that requires unpredictable responses. She was right. I'd been predictable, coming home from work at the same time every day, handling problems with patience and methodical planning, trusting the people I loved to treat that trust with respect. But predictable didn't mean powerless. What's our timeline? I asked. Sebastian is planning to propose to Jackie next week, Margot said, consulting her notes. He's arranged for Brooke to drive her to what she thinks is a client dinner at the Waterford Country Club. Instead, it'll be a private dinner where he'll ask her to marry him after her divorce is finalized. How do you know all this? Because he used our joint credit card to pay for the ring and make the restaurant reservation. Sebastian has many talents, but subtlety isn't one of them. I had to admire her thoroughness. While I'd been discovering the betrayal, Margot had been 3 steps ahead, anticipating their moves and preparing countermeasures. Once she accepts his proposal, Margot continued, they'll accelerate their timeline. Jackie will probably ask you for a divorce within days, claiming she needs space to find herself or some similar nonsense. She'll offer to handle all the paperwork to make it easier on you. And if I agree? You'll sign away most of your rights without realizing it. The documents will be structured to give her immediate control of liquid assets and the house, supposedly for temporary support while the divorce is pending. By the time you understand what you've signed, she'll have sold everything and moved the money beyond your reach. But we're not going to let that happen. No, Margot smiled, and this time it was genuinely warm. We're not. She opened her portfolio and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents. I've taken the liberty of having my attorney prepare some paperwork of our own. These are preliminary injunctions that will freeze all marital assets the moment Jackie files for divorce. These are forensic accounting orders that will require full disclosure of any hidden accounts or transfers. And these are subpoenas for Sebastian's business records, since he's been using corporate resources to facilitate the affair. I flipped through the documents, impressed by their comprehensiveness. Every angle seemed to be covered, every potential loophole anticipated. This must have been expensive, I said. Consider it an investment in our mutual interests, Margot replied. Sebastian's business has been very profitable over the years, partly because I handle all the legal compliance and risk management. He's about to discover what happens when he loses that support while simultaneously facing a very aggressive opposing counsel. What about Brooke? What about her? She's an adult who chose to participate in defrauding you. The evidence clearly shows she accepted money and gifts in exchange for facilitating her mother's affair. That makes her complicit in any asset concealment or transfer. She's still just a kid. She's 21 years old and perfectly capable of understanding the consequences of her choices, Margot said firmly. Frank, I understand the impulse to protect her, but she's been actively working against your interests for months. Whatever happens to her now is the result of her own decisions. I knew she was right, but it still stung. I'd helped raise Brooke, had been proud of her accomplishments, had genuinely cared about her future. Learning that she saw me as nothing more than a temporary inconvenience was almost as painful as Jackie's betrayal. When do we file? I asked. Tomorrow morning, Margot said. My attorney will serve Jackie at her office and Sebastian will be served at his. The asset freezes will take effect immediately, and they'll both receive notice that any attempt to transfer or conceal marital property will be considered contempt of court. They'll know we're working together. Of course they will. That's part of the strategy. Right now, they think they're coordinating against two separate, unsuspecting spouses. When they realize we've been coordinating against them, it'll shatter their confidence and force them into reactive rather than proactive positions. I thought about this, imagining Jackie's face when she realized I'd known about the affair all along, that I'd been planning my own moves while she thought she was manipulating me. "There's one more thing," Margot said, pulling out a final document. "This is a quitclaim deed transferring your interest in the house to a trust. It's perfectly legal, but it means Jackie can't sell or mortgage the property without your explicit consent, regardless of what any divorce settlement might say." "When do I need to sign this?" "You already did," she said with a slight smile. "Yesterday, when you thought you were signing papers for a home equity line of credit. My attorney is also a notary, and the documentation is completely legitimate." I stared at her, suddenly understanding that I'd been maneuvered just as surely as Jackie had been, albeit toward a very different end. "You've been planning this longer than I realized," I said. "I've been planning for the possibility since Sebastian's first affair," she admitted. "I learned a long time ago that hoping for the best is fine, but preparing for the worst is smarter. And if I'd decided not to cooperate with you, then you would have proceeded with whatever plan you'd developed on your own, and I would have wished you luck. But Frank, you're not the first man Sebastian has done this to. His pattern is always the same. Identify a married woman who's feeling undervalued, romance her back into his life, then help her extract maximum assets from her current husband before moving on to the next conquest. He's done this before? 3 times that I know of. The difference is that their previous husbands didn't have a partner who understood Sebastian's methods and had the resources to fight back effectively. I sat back in my chair, trying to process everything I'd learned. In the space of a week, I'd discovered that my marriage was a lie. My stepdaughter was a willing accomplice to that lie, and my wife's ex-husband was a serial predator who'd apparently made a career of destroying other people's relationships. But I'd also learned that I wasn't facing this alone, that there were ways to fight back, and that sometimes the best response to betrayal was careful, methodical planning, rather than emotional reaction. "What happens after we file?" I asked. "Then we wait for them to make their next move," Margot said, "and we'll be ready for whatever that might be." I shook hands with her again, sealing our partnership for whatever was coming next. As I drove home, I felt something I hadn't experienced since this whole nightmare began. A sense of control. Jackie and Sebastian and Brooke had made their plans in secret, thinking they were the only ones capable of strategic thinking. Tomorrow, they were going to discover that other people could play chess too, and some of us had been thinking several moves ahead. I was replacing a circuit breaker at a downtown office building when my phone started buzzing with calls. The first was from Jackie, then Brooke, then Jackie again. I let them all go to voicemail while I finished connecting the new breaker to the electrical panel. "Frank, you need to call me immediately." Jackie's voice was tight with panic. "Something's happened. There's been some kind of mistake with our accounts." The second message was from Brooke, equally frantic. "Frank, Mom's freaking out about some legal papers. She needs to talk to you right away." The third was Jackie again. "Frank, please. I know you're working, but this is an emergency. The bank says our accounts are frozen, and there are lawyers involved. I don't understand what's happening." I finished my work, tested the new breaker, and cleaned up my tools before returning the calls. 23 years of electrical work had taught me that panic led to mistakes, and mistakes in my line of work could be fatal. Jackie answered on the first ring. "Frank, thank God. Where are you?" "Downtown office building. What's going on?" "I don't know." Her voice was shaking. "I went to the bank this morning to make a deposit, and Mike told me our accounts were frozen. Then these lawyers showed up at my office with papers saying I'm being sued for... I can't even pronounce half of these legal terms." "Slow down," I said calmly. "What exactly do the papers say?" "Something about asset concealment and marital fraud and..." "Frank, they know about Sebastian." No, what about Sebastian? The silence stretched long enough that I could hear her breathing. Jackie? What do they know about Sebastian? We've been meeting to discuss Brooke's future and our past, and she was crying now. Frank, I'm so sorry. I never meant for this to happen. For what to happen? I think I've made a terrible mistake. I closed my eyes, feeling a mixture of satisfaction and genuine sadness. This was the moment I'd been planning for, but hearing Jackie finally admit her betrayal didn't feel as good as I'd expected. Where are you now? I asked. At home. Brooke's here too. Frank, can you come home? Please, I need to explain everything. I'll be there in an hour. I used the drive time to call Margot and get an update on the morning's legal activities. Both services went smoothly, she reported. Jackie's attorney tried to claim the papers were improperly served, but my investigator was there to document the entire interaction. Sebastian's reaction was colorful. How colorful? He threw the papers at the process server and started shouting about harassment and conspiracy. His office manager had to physically restrain him from following the server into the hallway. And the asset freezes? Fully in effect. Neither Jackie nor Sebastian can access any joint accounts, make any large purchases, or transfer any property without court approval. They're both essentially locked out of their own financial lives until this is resolved. How long will that take? Depends on how cooperative they want to be. If they agree to full disclosure and mediation, we could have preliminary agreements within a month. If they want to fight, Margot's voice trailed off meaningfully. They'll fight, I said with certainty. Sebastian's too arrogant to back down, and Jackie's too scared to think clearly. Then it could take 6 months to a year, during which time all marital assets remain frozen and both of them will be paying substantial legal fees. I pulled into my driveway to find Brooke's car parked at an odd angle, as if she'd been in a hurry. Through the front window, I could see both women pacing around the living room, their body language screaming anxiety and confusion. Jackie met me at the door, her eyes red from crying, and her professional composure completely shattered. Frank, I am so sorry, she said, reaching for me. I know how this must look, but I can explain everything. Okay, I said, stepping past her into the house. Let's hear it. Brooke was sitting on the couch, her phone clutched in both hands like a lifeline. She looked up when I entered, and for the first time in months, she seemed like the scared college student she actually was, rather than the sophisticated manipulator she'd been pretending to be. Frank, she said quietly, I'm sorry too. This is all my fault. How is it your fault? I asked, genuinely curious to hear her explanation. I told Mom she should reconnect with Dad. Sebastian, I mean. I thought it would be good for her to have closure about their relationship before you and Mom. Before we what? Jackie and Brooke exchanged a look that told me they'd already discussed how much to reveal. Before we talked about our future, Jackie said carefully. Frank, I've been feeling like maybe we want different things from life. You're happy with the way things are, but I've been wondering if there might be more for me out there. More what? More everything. More excitement. More opportunities. More, I don't know. More life. I sat down in my usual chair, the one I'd occupied for thousands of evenings over the past 3 years, and looked at the two women who'd been systematically lying to me while planning to destroy everything I'd built. So, you decided to explore those opportunities with Sebastian, I said. It wasn't supposed to be like that, Jackie said quickly. We were just talking at first, about Brooke, about old times, about what we'd both learned from our mistakes. But then you started having an affair. We haven't. She stopped, realizing that denial was pointless. Yes, we've been seeing each other. But Frank, it's not what you think. What do I think? That we've been planning this. That we've been deliberately deceiving you. But it just happened. We didn't set out to hurt you. I pulled out my phone and opened the audio file Margot had given me. Jackie's voice filled the room, discussing the sale of our house and her plans for the proceeds. "The house should sell quickly," her recorded voice said. "Frank won't see it coming. He trusts me completely." Jackie's face went white as she listened to her own words. Brooke started crying again, probably recognizing her own voice in the background of the recording. "Where did you get that?" Jackie whispered. "Does it matter?" I asked, stopping the playback. "The question is whether you want to keep lying to me or if you're ready to have an honest conversation." "Frank, please, let me explain." "I'm listening." She sat down across from me, her hands shaking as she tried to compose herself. "You're right," she said finally. "We were planning to end our marriage, but not to hurt you. I thought if I handled everything, if I made it as easy as possible for you, it would be less painful for both of us. By selling our house without telling me? By making sure you got your fair share without having to go through a long, expensive legal battle. Frank, I know how much you hate conflict. I thought if I could arrange everything cleanly, we could both move on without destroying each other. And Sebastian was helping you arrange this out of the goodness of his heart? He has experience with divorce settlements. He wanted to make sure I didn't make any mistakes that would hurt either of us financially." I had to admire her ability to reframe their betrayal as consideration for my feelings. Even now, caught with overwhelming evidence of her deception, she was trying to maintain the fiction that she'd been protecting me. "What about Brooke's role in all this?" "I asked her to drive me to meetings because I was too nervous to go alone," Jackie said. "She was just trying to support me through a difficult time." "By accepting bribes from Sebastian?" Brooke's head snapped up. "How do you know about that?" "The same way I know about the college tuition he promised you, and the car, and the apartment near campus he was going to help you afford. Did you really think there wouldn't be records of those transactions?" "Frank," Jackie said desperately, "whatever you think you know, we can work this out. We don't need lawyers and frozen accounts and all this legal drama. We're adults. We can handle this ourselves. The way you handled it when you were planning to sell my house without telling me." "Our house," she corrected automatically, then realized how that sounded. "Frank, I know I made mistakes, but this legal action, these frozen accounts, you're hurting yourself as much as you're hurting me. We can't access our money either." "I can access my money," I said quietly, "just not our money." The implications of that statement sank in slowly. Jackie's face went from confused to shocked to horrified as she realized what I was telling her. "You've been planning this," she said. "You've been planning this longer than we have." "I've been reacting to what you've been planning," I corrected. "The difference is that I waited until I understood the full scope of your intentions before I responded." "Frank, please. We can still fix this. We can call off the lawyers, unfreeze the accounts, and work out a fair agreement between ourselves." "What would a fair agreement look like, Jackie?" "We split everything 50-50. The house, the savings, the retirement accounts. Clean and simple." "And you marry Sebastian and live happily ever after?" Yes, eventually. But that doesn't mean I want to destroy you in the process." I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the neighborhood I'd grown to love, the house I'd improved with my own hands, the life I'd built that was now being dismantled by people I'd trusted. "The problem with your proposal," I said without turning around, "is that it assumes I'm willing to reward your betrayal with exactly the outcome you were planning to steal from me." "Frank, please, I'm not finished." I turned back to face them. "You spent months planning to deceive me, to take half of everything I've worked for, and to do it in a way that left me no recourse and no dignity. You involved my stepdaughter in that deception, turning her into an accomplice to fraud. And now that you've been caught, you want me to voluntarily give you exactly what you were planning to take." "What do you want?" Jackie asked quietly. I want you to understand that actions have consequences, I said. I want you to experience what it feels like to have your life turned upside down by someone you trusted. And I want you to learn that some people are a lot less predictable than you assumed. I walked toward the door, then stopped and looked back at them. You'll both want to get lawyers, I advised. Good ones, because this is just the beginning. As I drove away, I could see them through the rearview mirror, standing in the doorway of the house they'd been planning to sell, finally understanding that the harmless, predictable electrician they'd been manipulating was capable of fighting back. The old electrical system in our marriage had finally overloaded. Time to see how they handled the power outage. 3 weeks later, I was living in a furnished apartment across town, and Jackie was discovering what it meant to have no access to the financial resources she'd been counting on. Margot's updates had become a regular source of grim satisfaction. Sebastian's business is hemorrhaging clients, she reported during our weekly coffee meeting. Word has gotten out about the legal troubles, and apparently his reputation for discreet personal services isn't playing well with the country club crowd. What about Jackie? She's had to move in with her sister. The house is still tied up in legal proceedings, and without access to your joint accounts, she can't afford her own place. Her real estate career has essentially stalled. It's hard to project success and stability when your own life is falling apart publicly. I felt a twinge of something that might have been guilt, but it passed quickly. Jackie had made her choices with full knowledge of the potential consequences. The fact that she hadn't expected those consequences to actually materialize wasn't my problem. And Brooke? Withdrew from college. Couldn't afford tuition without Sebastian's promised support, and apparently you were the co-signer on her student loans? I had been. It was one of the many financial entanglements I'd entered into gladly, back when I thought we were a real family working toward common goals. I revoked my co-signer status as soon as the asset freeze took effect, I said. Legal advice from my attorney. Can't be responsible for debts incurred as part of a fraudulent scheme. Harsh but smart, Margot agreed. She's moved back in with Jackie and her sister. 3 women in a 2-bedroom apartment, no income to speak of, and legal bills mounting daily. What are they offering in settlement negotiations? Everything they originally planned to take, Margot said with amusement. 50-50 split of all assets, clean divorce, no admission of wrongdoing. They seem to think their situation will improve if they can just get back to their original timeline. And our counteroffer? 60-40 split in your favor, full restitution for legal costs and investigative expenses, and a binding agreement that neither Jackie nor Brooke will contest your claim to the house. Oh, and Sebastian has to pay a penalty equal to the amount he spent bribing Brooke. They'll never agree to that. Probably not. Which means we proceed to the next phase. Margot pulled out her tablet and showed me a series of documents that looked like they belonged in a corporate boardroom rather than a divorce proceeding. Phase 2 involves expanding the scope of our investigation, she explained. Sebastian's business records show a pattern of using company resources for personal affairs. Not just with Jackie. Apparently this has been going on for years. If we can establish a pattern of corporate malfeasance, we can pursue criminal charges in addition to the civil case. Criminal charges? Fraud, tax evasion, possibly racketeering if we can prove he's been systematically targeting married women as part of a broader scheme to acquire assets. My forensic accountant thinks there's enough evidence to interest the district attorney. I stared at the documents, trying to process what she was telling me. This goes way beyond divorce proceedings. Yes, it does. The question is whether you're comfortable with that level of escalation. I thought about Jackie crying in our living room, about Brooke's terrified face when she realized her college plans were collapsing, about the 3 of them crowded into a small apartment, wondering how their careful plans had gone so wrong. Then I thought about the months of lies, the casual way they'd discussed destroying my life, the complete absence of remorse, until they'd been caught. What would criminal charges mean for them? For Jackie and Brooke? Probably nothing. if they cooperate with the investigation. They were victims of Sebastian's manipulation as much as co-conspirators. For Sebastian? Potentially 5 to 10 years in federal prison, depending on how extensive his operation turns out to be. And if we don't pursue criminal charges? Then we're limited to civil remedies. We can take his money, but we can't stop him from doing this to other families. That decided it for me. This wasn't just about my marriage anymore. It was about preventing Sebastian from destroying other people's lives the way he'd destroyed mine. File the criminal complaint, I said. Are you sure? Once we take this step, there's no going back to simple divorce proceedings. This becomes a federal case with media attention and public records and all the complications that come with that. I'm sure. Margot smiled, and for the first time since I'd met her, it looked genuinely happy rather than coldly calculating. Good, she said, because I've been looking forward to watching Sebastian explain his business model to a federal prosecutor. 2 days later, FBI agents raided Sebastian's offices and seized his business records. The local news covered it as a story about white-collar crime and real estate fraud, but those of us involved understood it as something much more personal. Jackie called me that evening, her voice hollow with shock. Frank, what have you done? I've made sure Sebastian can't do to other families what he did to ours. He could go to prison. Yes, he could. Frank, please. I know you're angry, and you have every right to be, but this is destroying everyone. Brooke can't find a job because her name is in the newspapers. I can't work because my clients don't trust me anymore. We're barely surviving. You should have thought about that before you decided to defraud me. We never meant— Yes, you did, I interrupted. You meant every bit of it. You planned it carefully, you executed it methodically, and you would have succeeded if you hadn't underestimated me. The only thing you didn't mean was to get caught. What do you want from us? She asked, and I could hear the desperation in her voice. I want you to understand that some mistakes can't be fixed by apologies and good intentions. I want you to live with the consequences of your choices the same way I've had to live with the consequences of trusting you. Frank, please, I'm begging you, call off the federal investigation. We'll agree to any settlement terms you want. Just please, don't let them send Sebastian to prison. It's out of my hands now, I said, which was true. The FBI was pursuing their own investigation based on evidence that went far beyond my marriage. The federal prosecutors don't care about our divorce. They care about the pattern of fraud they've uncovered. A pattern? You weren't Sebastian's first victim, Jackie, or his second, or his third. You were just the latest in a long line of married women he's manipulated and discarded over the years. The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long, I wondered if she'd hung up. Jackie, are you there? How many others? She asked quietly. At least 6 that the FBI has identified so far. Probably more once they finish going through his records. 6 other women? 6 other marriages he helped destroy. 6 other families he tore apart for profit. How does it feel to know you were just another mark in his long con? I hung up before she could answer, but I thought I could guess. Jackie had genuinely believed she was special, that Sebastian had reconnected with her out of love rather than opportunism. Learning that she was just another target in his ongoing scheme had probably shattered whatever romantic illusions she'd been clinging to. My phone rang again immediately, but I didn't answer. There was nothing left to discuss. The legal machinery was in motion, the evidence was overwhelming, and the consequences were inevitable. I sat in my small apartment, eating takeout Chinese food and watching the evening news. The lead story was about Sebastian's arrest on federal fraud charges, with footage of him being led away in handcuffs, while reporters shouted questions about his marriage disruption scheme. The reporter mentioned that the investigation was ongoing, that federal prosecutors expected to file additional charges, and that several other individuals were cooperating with the investigation in hopes of avoiding prosecution themselves. I wondered if Jackie and Brooke were among those cooperating individuals, and decided I didn't really care. They'd made their choices, and now they were living with the results. My phone buzzed with a text from Margot. Phase 3 complete. Settlement conference scheduled for next week. Congratulations, Frank. You've officially graduated from victim to victor. I set the phone aside and returned to my dinner, thinking about the strange turns life could take. 6 months ago, I'd been a trusting husband working overtime to support my family's dreams. Tonight, I was a man who'd helped bring down a criminal enterprise and reclaim control of his own destiny. The old Frank would have been horrified by the destruction I'd caused, would have felt guilty about the collateral damage to innocent people, would have wondered if there had been some gentler way to resolve the situation. But the old Frank had been naive enough to believe that good intentions and honest work were enough to protect the people you loved. The new Frank understood that sometimes the only way to stop predators was to hunt them down and destroy their ability to hurt others. I raised my beer in a silent toast to the man I used to be and the man I'd become. Both of them had served their purpose. The settlement conference lasted 3 hours and resulted in exactly the outcome Margot had predicted. Jackie agreed to a 60-40 asset split in my favor, signed over her interest in the house, and accepted full responsibility for her own legal fees. In exchange, I agreed not to pursue civil damages for the fraud and deception. Brooke wasn't party to the divorce settlement, but she did testify before the federal grand jury that indicted Sebastian on 17 counts of mail fraud, wire fraud, and racketeering. Her cooperation earned her immunity from prosecution, but not from the social and financial consequences of her choices. Sebastian pleaded guilty to avoid trial and received 8 years in federal prison. The judge noted during sentencing that his systematic exploitation of vulnerable marriages for personal profit represented a particularly cruel form of white-collar crime that had destroyed multiple families over the course of nearly a decade. I kept the house, of course, spent the next few months rewiring it completely. New electrical panel, new circuits throughout, everything brought up to current code standards. It was expensive and time-consuming, but when I finished, I had a home that was truly mine, built to specifications that would last for decades. Margot and I remained friends, bonded by the shared experience of dismantling our respective marriages and the people who'd tried to destroy them. She divorced Sebastian while he was in prison, keeping most of his business assets as part of their settlement. She offered me a job with her consulting firm, but I declined. I'd discovered I preferred working with my hands to working with legal documents. Jackie moved to another state after the settlement was finalized, taking a job with a real estate firm that apparently didn't do thorough background checks. We haven't spoken since the day she signed the final papers, and I don't expect we ever will again. Some chapters end with empty pages, as Margot once observed. Brooke tried to contact me several times over the first year, apologetic letters and phone calls asking for forgiveness and financial help with college expenses. I didn't respond to any of them. She'd made her choice when she accepted Sebastian's bribes, and I'd made mine when I decided that actions should have consequences. The local newspaper ran a follow-up story 6 months later about the marriage disruption scheme and its aftermath. They interviewed several of Sebastian's previous victims, women who'd thought they were reconnecting with old flames, but had actually been targeted by a predator who specialized in identifying and exploiting marital vulnerabilities. The reporter asked me for a comment, but I declined. My story wasn't about revenge or justice, or any of the themes that make for good newspaper copy. It was about learning that sometimes the people you trust most are the ones most capable of betraying that trust, and that the only reliable protection against such betrayal is the willingness to fight back when necessary. I still work as an electrician, still take pride in installations that will function safely and reliably for decades. But I've also learned to recognize faulty wiring in human relationships, to spot the dangerous connections that can cause entire systems to fail catastrophically. The house is quiet now, but it's a peaceful quiet rather than a lonely one. I've rewired it to my own specifications, and every circuit is exactly where it should be. Some people might say I went too far, that the punishment exceeded the crime, that I should have found a way to forgive and move forward rather than systematically destroying the lives of people who'd once been my family. Those people have never discovered that their entire life was built on lies, never felt the particular betrayal that comes from realizing that the people closest to you see you as nothing more than an obstacle to their happiness. They've never had to choose between being a victim and being a villain. I chose to be the villain, and I sleep better at night because of it. The electrical work is solid, the connections are secure, and the system will function exactly as designed for as long as I need it to. Sometimes that's the best you can hope for. Sometimes that's enough.